Here we go. Sarah Conley Odenkirk, we're so lucky to have her with us today. She is the founder of Art Converge and has practiced law in the area of fine art for more than 25 years. She advises clients in both transactional and policy matters related to all aspects of art business in both private and public realms and provides guidance in cultural strategy through a legal lens. So she's full of great information. Sarah is the author of a surprisingly interesting book about contracts for artists and other creatives. So definitely look that up as a resource. She's also the publisher of an online database and the comprehensive resource guide for public art and private development, if that's something you're interested in initiating in your community. She's a frequent speaker at professional conferences in both the legal and art fields. We know Sarah through those legal and art fields, and we're so glad to have her with us again today. This is our third session in this series, and we'll have a fourth session, not next Thursday because of the holiday, but the following Thursday on December 3rd. And you'll get the same sort of login information that day that we've done this day. So be sure you sign up for that. Without further ado, Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie, and thank you so much for hosting these sessions. It's been a lot of fun so far, and hopefully today will be no different. So with COVID restrictions continuing into the foreseeable future and the pandemic wreaking havoc on our economy, many artists have been spurred into action to think a little bit more about putting their own businesses online rather than waiting for things to return to, quote, normal. Even in normal times, however, many artists have a really difficult time getting gallery representation. And so figuring out alternative means for selling work should be, if it isn't already, a top priority. So today, I'm going to cover a really wide range of information having to do with online engagement. We're just going to touch the very surface of a lot of these areas. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. But I'm going to start off the session by briefly covering some of the current tech basics that you should at least have a passing understanding of as you get involved in online business. This will help you orient yourself and hopefully be more successful as you move forward. So first, let's see if I can get these slides to move. We will take a look at blockchain basics. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have already heard of blockchain. Hopefully this will not be a complete repeat of information for everybody. Then we'll take a look at smart contracts. We'll focus on online marketplace options for artists. We'll just briefly touch on different ways that artists can think about bringing their art to the online environment. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have time for questions and answers. So hopefully we'll have plenty of time. So keep those questions and answers written down and ready to go. All right, so let's start off with what is blockchain. What it is not is cryptocurrency, and oftentimes you'll hear these two terms being used interchangeably, and they're really not at all the same. We'll get to cryptocurrency in a minute because they are related, but blockchain is really its own thing, and it's a relatively simple concept. Blockchain is an immutable distributed ledger, which sounds complicated, but it's actually something that I'm sure everybody is actually familiar with, even if you don't even realize it. So it's a ledger or a series of entries that contain important information, and it's distributed over a computer network. We're not going to have time today to get into the difference between public and private networks, but understand that obviously there's a lot more detail underlying a lot of these concepts. This ledger of information is immutable because once the information is entered, it can't be changed. And information is so widely dispersed on multiple systems that any one change isn't going to be recognized or authenticated by the other nodes in that network. So while nothing is perfect, and we don't really have time to get into the pitfalls and potential security challenges, for the most part, it's accepted that information entered into a blockchain is unchangeable and secure. This is the analogy that I like to use to explain the concept in a way that tends to make sense and stick, at least in my mind. So imagine that you're in a class and the teacher has a grade book. You take a test, you get an F. You're unhappy with this. So during lunchtime, you sneak into the classroom and you change your grade to an A+, of course. Not impossible, not necessarily that easy, but not impossible. But imagine, however, if everybody in the classroom has a grade book, and when you get that F, it's noted in every single one of those grade books. If that's the case, once the students and the teacher leave the classroom, they're dispersed, you don't even know where they are. And so it's much more difficult to track everybody down and change the grade in every single one of those grade books. Hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer to those who are having some challenges understanding what blockchain is. And it's important to understand that basis because now we're going to just mention quickly cryptocurrency. So blockchain provides the platform on which cryptocurrency sits. Cryptocurrency uses blockchain technology to create a decentralized currency that is separate from banks or governmental institutions. And it's important to understand here that in some ways, like the art world, there is a desire with the cryptocurrency world to sort of be separate from established institutions, which may or may not be beneficial, but it's certainly something that has attracted a lot of attention and a lot of money. Bitcoin is the original cryptocurrency and has recently seen a huge surge in value, like just in the last couple of days. Some people are saying that it's because President-elect Biden has appointed a cryptocurrency-friendly person to be part of his team in that financial policy transition. So we'll see what happens under the next administration. Bitcoin is frequently confused with Ethereum, but it's important to understand that they are not at all the same. Bitcoin is a currency and Ethereum is a platform. Ethereum is its own world, basically its own internet that has its own applications, its own language, the coding language that's used, and its own payment system. That payment system is called Ether. Ether is more akin to Bitcoin than Ethereum. So understand that Ethereum is really its own universe, separate from Bitcoin. Okay, those are the two main, but there are, of course, other tokenized currencies that have been created and will continue to be created as this market expands. This might seem like a little more technical speak than you were bargaining for today, but it is important to be familiar with these concepts because more and more businesses are accepting payment in cryptocurrency, especially for online transactions. And as you venture into that online space or develop your business presence there, you'll undoubtedly encounter these concepts and terms. One potential challenge to look for in the future, though, and we can talk a little bit more about this later if you're interested, is the current trend toward tightening the Know Your Client regulations. This is generally speaking, a banking type regulation, but everybody who's involved in selling artwork is also required to recognize the KYC or Know Your Client regulations. These are aimed at curtailing money laundering and fraud, and they require that sellers establish a protocol to get to know who the buyer is, who's providing money. This is something that is a bit of a challenge right now. It could clash with this free from regulation ethos that cryptocurrency really likes to maintain. So something to look for in the future. Okay, let's move on to smart contracts. So where I find the application of a lot of the technological stuff that we just briefly covered to be much more interesting is in the application of smart contracts. Smart contracts is actually a little bit of a misnomer in that it's not actually a smart contract, but more like an automatic contract. But let's not split hairs here. The term smart contract has been pretty widely accepted, so we'll go with that. A smart contract is a computer protocol that digitally facilitates, verifies, and enforces the negotiations and terms of an agreement. It sets up a situation where the functioning of the contract is predetermined and should not require the actions of any third parties along the way. So something to understand here is that smart contracts aren't actually a new concept. but it is new in that they are layered onto the blockchain for the way that they're executed. Many of us over the age of, say, 40, remember the coding classes that were all the rage in the 1980s. Mine was in the back room of Radio Shack, which was at the cutting edge of technology at that point. And what we learned to do in those classes was to program very basic programming using if-then scenarios. So if X happens, then Y should happen. And like I said, what's new is the use of this kind of concept on the blockchain to execute the contracts. So in this way, smart contracts really do have the ability and the potential to change the landscape for commerce, of course, including in the art market as well. So the basic concept, the basic structure for smart contracts is as follows. You've got your computer code. The contract is, in fact, the computer code. It's launched on a decentralized network, that's the blockchain. It can be activated with cryptocurrency, and there are some ways to integrate currency conversion into that system, but essentially we start with the concept that it's activated by cryptocurrency. The if-then commands determines the functioning of the application. The outcome is verified electronically, and then the whole transaction is logged into the blockchain ledger. So this is obviously, it sounds much more complicated. It is complex, but it happens almost instantaneously. So think of transactions like in real estate sales, where there's an escrow agent who holds the funds for a transaction and waits until everything is verified and documents are signed, and then that person then executes the disbursement of the money and the recording of the titles. In this case, when you have a smart contract, you don't need that middle person. So there is, in some ways, a simplification of the process. But of course, you do have to worry about what information goes into this. So we'll get to that in a moment. Basically, another analogy that helps is to think about this process as being a very secure vending machine. So you put your money in and out comes the result that hopefully you have chosen. I, being a little bit more analog and obsessed with Rube Goldberg devices, love the idea of the self-operating napkin as another way of considering this. Though this contraption does seem a little bit more tenuous than I would like to hope smart contracts are going to be, its precariousness does raise this important caveat that I just mentioned, which is that it's important to remember that there is a garbage in, garbage out risk with any blockchain transactions and really any smart contract type of work that you're doing online. Meaning that if improper information or incorrect information is placed into the blockchain, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to remove that. And of course, the outcome might not be as reliable if we're aiming for a secure vending machine or a self-operating napkin, if there's incorrect information that has been put into that blockchain environment. Okay, speeding along here. One of the flashier ways that this technology has been applied in the art market is through the fractionalization of blue chip artwork. This is something that may be appealing to some. It's been touted as the democratization of art collecting. The intense and somewhat uninformed interest in this new business model relies on the technology that offers an opportunity to transact business outside the standard regulated system, and has given rise to a lot of these ventures that sell fractionalized interest in artwork by promoting, it's sort of a lottery-like potential by allowing people to buy into art investments. And the way this happens, this is just one example. This is the Masterworks website. This is one example, but there are a number of these companies out there. So rather than buying an entire work on your own, you can invest in a fraction of the piece by putting in a fraction of the value, and you essentially buy a share in the work. When it eventually sells, and in this case, I think they have listed here that they hold the artwork for 3 to 10 years. So when the work sells, if there's a profit, you receive your share of the upside. This is basically a polished version of an already existing investment vehicle that many of you may have heard of already, which is hedge funds. It is a market-based lottery ticket. In this case, it is a U.S. company. They register with the Securities and Exchange Commission, but don't let that fool you. This is still a very risky investment. And while the sheen of the art market being involved makes it very sexy, I'm still cautiously waiting to see how this all plays out. And I'm not sure whether this is the best way necessarily to democratize art collecting. One venture that I think is using the fractionalization model in a way that's interesting and employing blockchain technology in a more artist-friendly way is Snark Art. They are one of a number of projects that have emerged online that look at different ways to use these new technological tools to engage with artists in a different way. And like I say, I like their approach. I'm curious to see where they take this. One of their first projects shown here was called 89 Seconds Atomized. So what they did here was they took an artist proof of Eve Sussman's video, 89 Seconds in Alcazar, and they fractured it into more than 2,300 unique blocks to create a new and largely conceptual artwork on the blockchain. An experiment in ownership and collective interaction, the piece can be reassembled and screened at will by the community of collectors. So you buy a block and you own that block. You can see these little squares on the screen indicate the portion that you're purchasing. And then you become part of this community, which collectively shares the ability to screen the work as a whole. So again, projects to look for and interesting ways in which some of this technology is being used for better or worse. So how do artists engage with the online marketplace? And this is, of course, a big question for people. There are many options, and I'm going to go through a couple of the different categories of options, but obviously there's way too many to go through everything. I'll throw out these categories. If you have specific questions about any particular aspect of them, please let's talk about them during the Q&A session, and we can dive in a little bit deeper. So one category is your sort of print to order sites that allow you to upload artwork or photographs and put them on, put those art pieces or images onto merchandise. It's pretty easy. It's some are more expensive than others, but it's a pretty easy process and one that a lot of people have certainly gotten used to using and getting some work out there or using it as a way to market work. Then there are the communal marketplaces like Etsy. They allow you to create a page, sort of like an online booth for your work and sell your wares. This is more popular and appropriate really in the craft area and not so much for the fine arts, which does have its own options. So here we've got Big Cartel, which allows for a more personalized marketplace to be developed by artists. This is something that, I like. What I like about these is that they walk you through the process in a very simple and easy way. It's not that there's never any bumps here, but it's a pretty easy way to set up an online store. And then you can connect that store to other social media accounts that you may have online. We can talk about that more in a moment. Then there are curated platforms like Saatchi Art, where you do have to be selected by these platforms in order to appear for sale on their websites. But because they're online, they are able to accommodate many more artists than they would if they were just a brick and mortar outlet. They're not having to store the artworks, obviously. They have access to many of the images, and it's all just presented online. Then there are companies like Artwork Archive that provide a range of services. There's the collections management and inventory management, sort of internal, but it also provides some tools for selling the work as well and keeping track of that. So Artwork Archive is an interesting one to look at in terms of creating that online business that is really directed to fine art. And then, of course, you can create your own custom website. Wix, Squarespace, and WordPress are three of the most popular, but there are many more out there. These platforms tend to be, again, pretty easy to use. The nice thing is that for the most part, they have very accessible support services. So if you're feeling insecure about setting up your own website, it's pretty easy to get some support from those providers so that they can walk you through the process and answer any questions that you have. Now to the social media question that I raised just a moment ago. You really can't think about developing your online presence without considering implementing one or more of the social media options. And a few of them are depicted here, of course. There are more, and of course there are more emerging every day. And this is what makes me feel so old, is when I realize that I've been using the wrong social media platform because 3 others have come along. So it's a little tough to keep up all the time, but talk to the teens, they know what's going on. Not too long ago, I asked a colleague who runs an international gallery how she selects artists to bring into the gallery or to look at and consider for shows. And she laughed because it really has changed so much in the last few years. And she said, I never thought I would say this, but actually Instagram. Instagram is a place that I look to all the time. And the reason is that not only will artists have their own accounts there where you can see how many followers they have and what kind of influence they're bringing to the marketplace, but collectors will use Instagram to communicate with each other about interesting things that they've seen, things that they're interested in purchasing, new purchases that they've made. And so from the dealer standpoint, looking at that social media presence can really indicate the marketability and viability of an artist in those in the gallery world scenarios. But again, as I said before, one of the challenges here is that so few artists are eventually able to get into galleries. So realistically, when we're talking about the majority of artists who are not able to get into galleries, there is a real need to start using these social media online platforms as a way to create your own marketplace, your own way to reach out to an audience. So as I mentioned earlier, you can tie a lot of your posts on one platform to another. So integrating, for instance, your Instagram account with your website is one way of making sure that traffic is being driven back and forth. But if you're dead set against participating in social media, I understand some people don't have the time. And in fact, you will have a lot more time on your hands than the rest of us. But then you do need to figure out a plan for how you're going to drive traffic to your online presence if it's not through one of the social media options. Additional ways to drive traffic might include emailing information to an emailing list, newsletters, invitations to participate in online events, developing a series of either webinars or online events. Some artists like to do tours of their studios or tutorials about the work that they're, the kind of work that they create. But basically, you want to create a targeted advertising campaign. And in some ways, this is the place where it might make sense to invest some money in hiring a consultant, somebody who can help you put together a very targeted campaign that's going to be effective in driving people to your website or whatever your online presence is, so that they can hopefully purchase your works. Okay, so I'm going to end here with a few pointers, I hope. There may be new technology, but most of what's out there builds on concepts that you're already familiar with in terms of marketing yourself and being out there and being available. So don't be fooled by the flash. And this is really important. I think a lot of the flash is designed to make you think that online opportunities are shinier or different than what they actually are. It is just another way to get your name, your images, your business out there. So rely on those things that you've learned in the past about business in general and see how you can apply that to the online environment. Do pay attention to the online terms that are employed in those platforms that you engage with, because a lot of these online platforms will require that you give up your intellectual property rights or agree to a pretty broad license. So it's not to say you shouldn't use them, but just be understanding of what those terms are, and don't just be attracted by the shiny new environment that you can put your work into. So pay attention. Being online is not magic, although it does seem like it sometimes. Number 2 is develop your online presence. Most platforms want to make it easy for you to have a presence. So if you're having trouble, like I said, there's usually somebody available to help you through a chat function or on the phone. Don't be afraid to set up your own website, but do consider how you're going to drive traffic to it. It might be worth hiring a consultant to help you get started, or to coach you on the best tools to use in order to make the most of your online presence. By diversifying your efforts across multiple platforms and connecting them so that they lead to each other, you'll drive more traffic and cover a broader territory. So hopefully people will be seeing your work and making purchases. Pay attention to the rules. As I mentioned, oftentimes there's a one-size-fits-all approach with some of these platforms, and one size definitely does not fit all. So pay attention to those platforms that are emerging that maybe have more customizable features that can really cater a little bit more to the art world. For instance, like I said, Facebook and Instagram will require some level of relinquishing intellectual property rights. This doesn't mean that you don't participate. It just means that you need to be aware of it ahead of time. And so you might want to also consider the platforms that do have a little bit more flexibility for you to create your own terms. And then lastly here, take it one step at a time. Don't expect to be the next Jeff Bezos, or maybe ever. But that shouldn't stop you from making use of those tools that are available online to promote your art and your practice. And then just a couple of things to look for in the near future. And I don't have a slide for this, but I'm just going to run through them briefly, and then we can get to the questions. Easier ways to implement smart contracts, I think, are coming our way soon. The concept of smart contracts is really catching on, and the idea that we would have this much more easily accessible and administrable process that we can employ is very appealing. So look for that to be a growing area that'll give you a little bit more freedom to call the shots and establish the business processes in the way that you'd like. It might also be the answer to the eternal challenge of having resale royalties for artists. So look for those types of developments in the smart contract area. Also, more platforms wising up to the needs of artists and offering more artist-friendly options, like providing documentation to protect your intellectual property rights, or better ways to protect your uploaded images. So again, as these platforms develop, there's more of an understanding of what artists need and the concerns that artists bring to the table in terms of wanting to protect that intellectual property and the images that are online. And then lastly, what I'm seeing a lot of are some growing interests around platforms that focus on issues of diversity and social justice and regional markets and other parameters that might help you create communities with other artists and connect with whether it's artists or other like-minded businesses. But this is one of the areas I think that the pandemic and the current political situation has really given some fuel to. So it'll be very interesting to see how these areas develop as well. Okay, I'm going to end it there and open it up for questions. I know that that was a lot of different material, but hopefully it's piqued some interesting questions and we can focus on that now. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see if there are questions.
Thanks, Sarah. It looks like we have one question that's come in the chat box yet, but don't hesitate to put in any more. Guys, I think it would be really interesting to hear from a couple different types of artists about how you see your work or these technologies applying to some different types of work. But we'll just start with this first question. Great slides. I love the humor. What amount should I expect to invest in an online presence? What might I be able to do with $500, for example?
Well, I'm not an online business setup expert, so I'm not exactly sure I'm the best person to ask about that. However, $500 is not going to get you that far. You can, of course, look at the opportunities on Instagram to set up a shop through Instagram, and that's not going to cost you anything. Some of the other programs or platforms are going to be subscription based, and so you'll have to look at the fees there. It is going to take certainly a lot of work on your part to get these things up and running. I would say that for $500, you should look at those more of the one size fits all categories, or something like Big Cartel that will offer a little bit more customization for what you'd like to do. It's not going to buy you a website necessarily unless you are doing all the work yourself. Another trick that I've used on occasion is to use something like Upwork, which has people all over the world who are working on coding and helping with websites, and that can be done a little bit more inexpensively. But the companies like Wix are very happy to help walk you through. You can try that out for free initially, see how it goes, and then decide if you want to pay the fees to have that ongoing access. So $500 is not going to get you that far, but you certainly can set something up for $500, especially if you're willing to put in the work yourself.
Just to add to that, I put the Upwork, the link to the Upwork website onto into the chat box. It's a really handy resource for finding if you have like nowhere to start looking for a professional resource from all, I mean, technological, engineering, sales and marketing. It's a good place to start if you don't have any places to go for a direct connection. It's just a really interesting website. I've actually never used it because I've been able to find, personal connections through professional circles, but it might be a way to start researching things, even if you don't use an Upwork professional. It might teach you something about how to go about researching and finding ways to subcontract out pieces of your work. The next question we have is, have you done a webinar on IP related issues? And is the recording available for me to watch? Actually, that is going to be our 4th session on December 3rd. Sarah, do you want to give us just do you have a little snippet you could share about what that one's going to cover?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we will go over the difference amongst trademark, copyright, and patent, just to kind of lay the foundation. We'll talk mostly about copyright since that's mainly what applies for artists. We will touch on fair use, all of this within a half an hour. Of course, these are, semester-long courses that we could be doing. But we will talk a lot about copyright and fair use and the applicability to artists, and again, have some time for questions.
Okay, so sign up for that one definitely on the 3rd of December. I'm going to move on. We got questions rolling in now, which is great. Have you ever seen an example of a group of artists banding together to share the cost of some of these technological related issues?
Yeah, this is something that in general I'm seeing more and more of during this particular time, where what we're seeing is nonprofit organizations banding together, galleries banding together. So we're seeing a lot more focus on collaborative efforts, and I think that's a fantastic way for people to go. I think sharing resources is excellent, and if you can find a group of like-minded artists or people with whom you'd like to market the works that you're making, that's an excellent thing to do. The challenge there is going to be, of course, agreeing on how to proceed. So if you do choose to get together a group of people, I think it makes sense to start by establishing some ground rules as to how that's going to work, who's in charge of what, so that you don't end up with everybody thinking somebody else is taking care of the design work or dealing with shopping carts. And so yes, I think that's an excellent idea. I don't have any examples to share, except that I can say that, in Los Angeles, the galleries have all gotten together to put together a collaborative website. I believe that's called Gala. And then, like I say, some of the visual arts organizations have banded together to raise money together. So this is something that I think is a very valuable concept and something that people should definitely be considering, especially in an environment where saving some money and experimenting with different options for getting the word out there can be a tricky scenario.
Thank you so much. Next one, what recommendations do you have for specifically literary artists, such as creative fiction or spoken word poets, as far as marketing and promoting their work, both published and not yet published?
Yeah, there are a couple of different areas that you can think about. Number one, you can self-publish, and places like Amazon have made it much easier to self-publish. So you consider that, but you have the same issue that everybody else does with their work. It's like you can put it online, but you have to drive traffic to that place where it can be purchased, or you've got to drive traffic and interest to yourself if you're going to be doing performances. So I think having webinars or online events that promote the work or provide a performance is an excellent way of bringing some attention to the work you're doing. You might start with just sending out email invitations to friends and asking them to bring friends and see if you can develop a bit of a network through word of mouth. It's the sort of thing that you can promote on social media if you are inclined to be on social media. And try to bring people that that you don't otherwise know to those events. So both doing online publishing as well as creating your own events to promote your work would be two ways that I would suggest focusing. Also, look at Snark Art because they do have a couple of literary projects that they've fractionalized, and I think that there are some interesting concepts there that maybe you can't implement in the way that they have, since they have spent a lot of time and money on building out their platform. But there are some interesting concepts about splitting up works and dispersing those in a way that bring a community together in order to share in the whole, and enjoying those pieces together, but only because everybody who has a piece of your work is present to share that. So thinking a little bit more creatively and ways to engage. I do feel like, especially now as we're looking at having an additional period of stay at home and social distancing, which is incredibly important for us to do, but it's hard. People are feeling very isolated and lonely. And so I think the more that you can do to create opportunities for people to come together, I think you'll find some interest right now. I think now is a good time to start developing and cultivating that online ability to connect.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Um, Another question, for those of us not inclined to constant engaging on Instagram or other social media platform, or constantly updating our website and art marketing websites, are these people that do it for you considered art agents? Is there a title for specialized service? Do listings of people that do this exist?
Yeah, this is a really interesting and tricky area. There are people, of course, who act as sort of the middle person, and it kind of in some ways falls into the same category as galleries in terms of having that middle person there to help promote your work. But they're not galleries. And there are agents and managers out there that like to focus on fine art clients. It's important that if you're going to engage one of these people, that you check them out and make sure that they actually have the connections to do the work that you need them to do, that they have some history of success. It could be that it's somebody who just happens to know, say, developers who are looking for artwork, and so they're able to connect you, or they know all the galleries in a particular area, or they're connected to different marketplaces around the country or around the world that could very well be helpful for you to engage with. My caution would also be in terms of how they're being compensated. I would be cautious of people who are asking for money up front. If somebody says, I need you to pay me $10,000 and then I'll market your work, rather than working on a more of a contingency basis or a commission basis where somebody is getting paid as they actually make sales for you. That said, there are people who do coaching, career coaching, and that is worth paying for. So if somebody is actually working with you and engaging with you and helping you figure out the best way for you to approach, whether it's online, in person, or any other way of marketing your work and positioning your practice, that is something worth pursuing. I know of a couple of different people. I'm happy to share that information. If you want to private message me or get in touch with Katie, I can share that information. So what you want to be careful of is people asking for large amounts of money up front and people who have absolutely no track record of actually getting anything done. Art consultants are incredibly helpful, the ones who are knowledgeable and have the connections and the experience in project management and connecting artists with opportunities. Those are definitely people to consider going to, and it's going to depend on your medium as to what kind of person or which person is going to be the best fit. One thing that we've seen over the last maybe 10 years, I'm in Los Angeles, and so what I've seen is an increased interest within the talent agencies to bring in artists. And, you know, of course, that mostly has to do with blue chip artists who are already super successful, connecting them with the celebrity community and entertainment world. But that said, I do think that there are some forward-thinking people out there that see opportunities with emerging artists. And especially now, as we're focused a little bit more on equity and diversity issues, there are going to be additional opportunities for emerging artists and people who have otherwise not been included in a lot of these conversations to find a much more solid place in that market. So I hope that that answered. I know that was kind of a vague answer, but yes, there are people out there who can help, and absolutely it can be helpful. Just be careful how you engage. Do we have another question, Katie?
Okay, yeah, they're rolling in now. We got lots of questions.
Oh, good. Stay here all day.
We've still got 15 minutes, so we've got time. The next question is, where and how can we find consultants to help with the issue you mentioned? I'm going to put the Upwork link that we mentioned before in here, and then I'll just add, one of the other participants in the call said that she's used Upwork to design a company logo. She said it's a great service and affordable, so it's really good feedback. And also, I'm seeing a lot of good feedback coming from the participants. I'm just going to read a couple. Someone says, I personally spend about $300 to $400 a year on my Squarespace site. I set it up myself. They have nice looking templates that are easy to use. So Squarespace, if you're looking to create a website.
And templates is a really good tip. So thank you for whoever posted that, because most of these services will have templates, and it's much less expensive if you go with the templates versus having a custom built site. So if you can figure out a way to make those templates work, you're definitely going to save yourself some money there.
And then also, our friend Heidi, an artist here, said she spent about $200 to pay for a new website through GoDaddy. She did all the work herself on their website builder. Said it took some time, but she's not a tech person at all, and she made it happen. And I've looked at her website. It looks great, Heidi. So bravo.
And this is something that I think everybody should definitely pay attention to, which is it's not that hard to set up the website. The hard part is driving the traffic. So the hard part is making sure that you put up the website and you don't figure, well, I'm done now. I'm ready for all the sales to roll in. That's not how it works. You can use that website as a calling card. So instead of a business card, you can direct people to your website, but you've got to get people coming in. And so the next step after you've created that website is absolutely to focus on the marketing plan to drive traffic to the website.
Okay. Next question. Could you go a little bit more in depth about the idea of owning a piece or a block of an artwork that lives or experienced online? Is that a complex process to offer as a newbie to the online marketplace?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I would say that the way in which Snark Art is executing it is complex. I mean, that's taken a lot of effort and technical expertise to put into place. But that said, there are ways to think about it a little bit differently and figure out different ways to fractionalize. And again, you know, this is where we go back to my comment about don't let the flash deter you. Um, we can think about ways to fractionalize ownership or to own different pieces of work. It doesn't have to be on the blockchain. I would suggest, in fact, that artists not spend a lot of time right now setting up their own blockchain system so that they can fractionalize on the blockchain. Think about different ways that you can sell the art. I know that there's an artist, he is in South America, but I believe he may be Italian. Anyway, he's a really interesting artist who has created a project where he sells the work for a small amount of money, the physical work itself, but the ability to transact with the work, so the certificate of authenticity, is sold through his gallery for much, much higher, like 10 times the amount that the artwork is sold for. So you have this concept of separating the physical ownership of the work itself from its place within the marketplace and the ability to resell or engage in the marketplace with that work. And you know, it's really a commentary on the gallery's position, the art market, and artists, of course. But it was an interesting and creative way to split up different aspects of owning art, which certainly doesn't require blockchain. So you can certainly think of creative ways that can be implemented in a more analog way, even if they're marketed online. That would be a way to consider invigorating or creating a community around your work.
Super. Okay, I've got one more question in my chat box here, and then we continue to have discussion if you would like. We got about 10 minutes left. The question is, do you have an idea of what is the standard when it comes to putting your work in a gallery? Is the industry standard 50-50? Is there an idea of them taking money or a certain amount of paintings up front when dealing with an art gallery?
Those are some good questions. The industry standard is 50-50, but that said, there are circumstances where 50-50 is not necessarily the way that the galleries will split with the artist. If you are an artist that has a track record, you might have a little bit more negotiating power to change that 50-50, but 50-50 is a good benchmark. Like that's the norm, is pretty much 50-50. Is there an idea of them taking money or a certain amount of paintings up front? I'm not totally sure I understand that part of the question, but galleries should not be asking for money up front from artists. Galleries should be, you know, providing to you a list or an explanation of what kinds of services they're going to provide to the artist. So what kind of marketing are they going to do? How often are you going to have a show? How often are they going to come and do a studio visit to see what work you're working on? And so what does that relationship entail? And understanding that up front is really important, especially if you're, you know, if you're an artist who does not produce work that quickly. You don't want to have a show every 6 months at a gallery because you'll not be able to fill the gallery, or maybe there will be one piece of work there. So having that conversation with the gallery in terms of what the expected exchange is, what the expected rate of creating work, and how often that work will be available within a show. Those are all very important questions to have up front. And certainly, you know, if a gallery is asking for money up front, that's a little bit strange. It is possible that galleries will specify that, for instance, they'll do a certain amount of marketing for you, say, you know, marketing it online, sending out email announcements to their mailing list. But if you want an ad published in Art in America, you're going to have to pay part of the cost or all of the cost. Or if you want a separate set of color cards to be printed and mailed out to a separate list of people, you'll have to pay a portion of that. So it's possible that you might have to share in the marketing costs if it's something that the gallery is not committed to covering from their end of the bargain. But that's, again, something to talk about. And this is why, you know, remember, it's coming from a lawyer here. I always recommend contracts because the contracts will more clearly lay out the expectations, what each party is able to provide and bring to the table. And it'll clarify what your expectations can be down the road. That said, a lot of galleries do not want to work with contracts, in which case I would recommend that you as the artist write down your expectations and send a letter to the gallery just confirming, it was lovely to meet with you. I just want to confirm that these are the terms of our arrangement, so that you have something in writing that either you can point back to if there's a dispute down the road, or they can object at the time and say, no, we didn't promise to do this, but we will do that instead. Same thing really for any medium, whether it's fine art, literary, music, anything else. Important to have those understandings up front in terms of what that person who's representing you is going to do for you and how they're going to get paid.
Joseph, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. That answered my question. I'm not a known artist, and there's a gallery who said they wanted like 5 to 10 paintings up front to promote me, and that they were kind of overpromising that they would sell a certain amount of my paintings. So I didn't think that was normal or not, but.
Well, what can happen sometimes is that if a gallerist really feels strongly about an artist's work, they might advance money. And sometimes that's important in terms of building a relationship with an artist, especially if that artist needs money for fabrication or there are other expenses involved in that artist being able to produce. So it could be one way of establishing more of a patronage model. I would be a little cautious and again, put things in writing. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have a situation where you've been advanced so much money that you end up in the hole to the gallery, owing money to the gallery so that even when sales happen, you're not digging yourself out, or that the gallery then has leverage to lower your prices or take a larger percentage or do any number of other things that would really put you in a place where you would be you'd have your back against the wall business-wise. So I would be careful for sure about those kinds of relationships. But at the same time, I never want to discourage people who see value and see potential in artists from investing in those opportunities.
Super. I had a thought as we were talking about how to direct people to your websites. If you would like to share a link to your websites in the chat box here, then maybe some of our other participants might check out your work and your sites. You're making a connection here, so feel free to put your website here in the chat box if you'd like to share. And then I do have one more question that's come in from Harold. Where and how can we find consultants to help with the issues you mentioned?
So, and I realize I didn't answer that clearly in terms of giving you a list, but it depends on where you are. Oftentimes, the kinds of consultants that you want to be working with are going to be local because they are people who are going to be more engaged with the local art community and understand what that market is and what kinds of things work well. It's tough, I think, especially if you are an emerging artist. It's tough to have somebody from across the country advising you unless there's a plan, unless there's a reason for that person to be stepping in. So again, it's important to be paying attention to who those consultants are and what their scope of work is. Now, how you find them, I have the most lawyerly answer of all. It depends. You can sometimes find them through galleries. So sometimes galleries may be unwilling to represent your work, but they might have somebody that they can put you in touch with who can help. You might speak with your local arts office, like the City of Phoenix's Arts and Culture Department. They may have lists of or know of art consultants, arts managers, other people who might be engaged in that kind of consulting work. Art consultants are definitely a growing profession, and we're seeing people taking advantage of not just the ability to be involved in public art, like large-scale commission works, but also working day to day with artists in terms of developing their careers and helping them to see opportunities. It may also be the sort of thing where you want to be talking with other artists that you know who maybe have used consultants, because the best way to find the best person is to get a good recommendation. And that does take some networking and communicating with others to find out who they've worked with, why it's worked for them. Maybe it's not the same thing that you're looking for, but understanding why something has been successful for them, and then reaching out and doing some interviews to see, you know, who fits best with your practice. So like I said, I can provide Katie a little bit later the contact information for a few people that I work with. Might not necessarily be the best people for everybody on this call or everybody in the country, but I have had some really great experiences with people who provide coaching, artist career coaching, and some of that consulting knowledge.
Harold, did that answer your question about the type of consultant you're looking for?
You can unmute, Harold, if you want to.
I got a yes in the chat box.
Okay, good, great.
Super. Thank you so much. All right, we are right at time now. Perfect timing. If anyone has further questions, you should have my email address from the email I sent out this morning with the login information. We look forward to seeing everybody, hopefully again on December 3rd when we talk about IP issues. Sarah, thank you again so much. I hope everyone has a great week.
Thank you. Thanks, Katie.